All right. I'm Rich Schmidt. I'm here with David and Jeanne Beck. We're at Crawford Beck Vineyard in Amity. It's December 3rd, 2019. Thank you both so much for joining us today. Let's start with the most important question of all, which is why wine?
Wine. We have lots of stories to tell you, Rich, and all of this really comes about a series of stories. The first story I'm going to start is we met. In a previous life, we were scientists. We met in graduate school in 1966, and it happened. There's a point of telling you that because it happened at that time that one of the few things that we did outside of graduate school, we were, totally immersed in our research and our programs. One of the things we did outside that, one of the few things we were able to was indulge an interest that I'm not sure exactly how it began, but in wine. Mm-hmm. We lived in Baltimore. We were not far from Washington, D.C., and time-wise, maybe 45 minutes down the Baltimore-Washington Expressway. And then that took us to a wine store, because there weren't, in those days, very many wine stores. Now we're used to a wine store everywhere, or a wine source everywhere. But then there was very little information, well, certainly information, but little sources for wine. Liquor, for sure, but not much on wine. And so in Washington, there was a wine store named Central Liquors. It's actually still there. And we could go down and buy wine very inexpensively. It was very near the Embassy Row, and so the people who primarily frequented that store were the international community in Washington, D.C. And we could buy for a few dollars wine now that would cost us hundreds of dollars if we were to find it, to be able to find it. And so we experimented with wine then, and we both liked it. We both enjoyed the idea of finding wines that worked with food, and finding wines that we liked, and finding wines that we didn't like, and it was not an expensive avocation that took us provided some perhaps relief from the dense intensity of our graduate work. And so we experimented with a lot of wine, and from there got to, as our careers unfolded, did a lot of traveling, especially as Jeanne's career unfolded. She ended up doing quite a lot of traveling because of the nature of her research. And so we experimented with wine from all over the world and found that the grape that we really liked best was Pinot Noir, and of course Chardonnay, and that we liked French Pinot, but Pinot from other places, Tasmania, you name it, from all over the places. So wine just became a natural avocation for us, and I can't remember a time in our married life when we weren't interested in wine, where we didn't have wine around, or even when we were poor, we had a little wine cellar, to keep us stocked. And so it's always been a part of our married life, for sure. Mm-hmm. And for the longest time, I actually had the original bottle. The first bottle of wine I ever had, I had the empty bottle. Mm-hmm. Now I can't find it. I don't know where it is, but it was a German Riesling, I think. But you remember we used to have it sitting around somewhere. I don't know where it is. Maybe I'll find it. Maybe it's in a box in the barn. So that's partly an answer to why wine. Now, how we got here is another story, and Jeanne tells that story much better than I do, because she was the cause of it. So
we came here in 2005. It was August of 2005 for a scientific meeting in Portland, and we had. This is the first time we had been in Oregon. So we decided to investigate the valley. Mm-hmm. And
naturally Pinot Noir.
Yes.
Of course.
And so after the meeting was over, we went to Cherry Hill Winery because they had these cabins where you could stay and they would let you work in the vineyard. So we spent, what, 2 or 3 days down at Cherry
3 days,
Hill,
yeah.
working in the vineyard and just getting an idea of what it was like. Well, that created a lot of problems. When we went home,
It captured us immediately.
oh, it did.
And at that point, we had been in science for 40-some years.
Yeah, 40 years.
And
So it was
spending
time
our
to-
time searching for money to, feed our habits, so to speak.
Writing grants, yes.
Writing grants. Yeah, writing
grants. That's another story we'll get into.
Yeah.
And so we went home, and this was the end of August. So by September, David found a real estate agent,
Yeah.
Lisa Neal, and Coeur de
There's a point
Terre.
of telling you that.
Yeah.
We'll explain that. Go ahead.
And the first thing she did was to, she spent quite a lot of time making sure that that you really knew what you were going to get into.
In 1 hour telephone conversation, she tried to persuade me not to do this, not to come out here, not to get involved in the industry. She
Yeah.
really wanted to tell us that it's not a get-rich-quick scheme. It's not something that one does without knowing what one's getting into. So she actually tried to persuade me. She said, "You really don't want to do this, do you?" And after she couldn't persuade us, then.
And this was early September, and she found some properties, and one was this property, which was not on the market. And what you saw it in October, I saw it in November. We bought it in December, and we moved out here
In February.
in February. February 2nd
February 2nd of 06.
of 2006.
So the thing that was going on here was that this vineyard was established by actually a NASA engineer or a NASA contractor, engineering contractor, and was involved in lots of space stuff and so forth. And he tried to do the entire thing by himself, and it was tough. It was clearly tough, and I know that from trying to do a lot of it myself, I can tell you that he was probably, as it got bigger and the vines got mature, he got in over his head, and so he was having trouble keeping up with it. And I guess the rumor spread around that there were some problems. Although, as Jeanne said, the vineyard was not on the market; it wasn't listed anywhere. But basically, Lisa Neal showed us the vineyard. And we made an offer that he couldn't refuse, I suppose. So, that's how we ended up here.
And the vineyard at that time was 10 years old. So we knew we couldn't buy land and plant it, and we wanted to get going. So we needed something that was already...
We also knew pretty quickly that we didn't really want to make wine. And the reason we didn't want to make wine was not because we were trained as chemists. We would love to do that kind of thing. It would be wonderful science. But we decided that it really wasn't... if you make wine, you've got to do one more thing, and that's you've got to sell the stuff. We could drink it, we could do that part of it, but selling it is really, really hard work. And watching how hard our clients work selling the wine that they make from the grapes from this vineyard, we made the right decision, because that is by far the hardest work. Growing grapes, tough. Making wine, tough. Selling it, virtually impossible. At least from my perspective. So we have the best of all worlds in the sense that we can grow the grapes. We sell them to some very high-end wineries. They make really high-quality wine, and we can get the wine back at favorable growers' prices, and we don't have to sell anything beyond that. So it's this vineyard needed. How do I want to say it? Some TLC, and from the very beginning, even before we did our due diligence, it was pretty clear that this vineyard had a shall we say, a privileged site. It has a wonderful micro terroir throughout the vineyard that varies from one block to the other. And the vineyard was competently planted. We did all of our, appropriate due diligence about the soils and the vines and the usual kind of things one does. So it was clear, and so as a result of that, the vineyard, when it began to produce, had never not been sold. The grapes were always in demand, and so we've never actually had trouble selling the grapes, even in the down years, even when in the surplus years, even in the years that were what you would call a buyer's market. We've really never had any difficult. The grapes have never gone unsold, and they've always been sold to what I would call the highest and the best wineries in the valley. So we put a lot of TLC in the vineyard over the next couple of years, and it's now in in excellent condition. The grapes, the trellis, the whole infrastructure.
And so we went from I went from probably 1,000 square foot laboratory to 15 acres of laboratory, and that's the way we view it. It's our science project or whatever.
That's a good thing to make note of. For us, this is a laboratory. We are continuously learning from it.
Continuous
and about
improvement.
It.
Yes. We track everything.
Yeah. Jeanne is an absolute data hound, and so at some point when we are old and gray, we're not there yet. Maybe the archives will get a whole lot of data from us because Jeanne just tracks everything. She's got weather records that Greg Jones, Jeanne has already shared all the weather records for the past 14 years with Greg. She has all the harvest data, all the phenology data, all the dates of bloom and bud break, and you name it. All that stuff, Jeanne has cataloged exhausweavely. So that's just to tell you that that's the way we approach the vineyard, approach doing this, what we've done. Now we're now just talking about the vineyard. There's lots more to talk about that's going on here, and so the vineyard is not the only thing that we're doing here.
But if we could go back a moment to Lisa. When
Oh, yes,
we
I
were
wanted to fill that
working
in,
with
yeah.
Lisa, one of the things she said to us is, you should take the classes at Chemeketa. And, she put us in touch with our accountant we're still using, the bank and so forth. But it was key to her that we go to Chemeketa. And we did, and we took classes there for probably 3 years. Yeah. And business classes too, which were incredibly helpful because we had not done business, the business
and
end of it.
interestingly enough, at the same time that we were at Chemeketa, a number of other people who were buying in at exactly the same time, folks whose names are now well known in the industry because they've established their vineyards and their wineries. They were going through the program with us, and so those people remain.
We still
very, very
we're
close
good friends, and we talk about lab, what it was like, and yeah.
So Lisa was a key part of getting us started. She's not doing the real estate stuff anymore. She's busy with her own wine operation, but the fact that she could make connections for us with all of the critical things, the bank, the lawyer, the accountant, sold us the property, and in the process it kind of introduced us to a lot of other folks, including when we were sorting grapes at her winery, her nascent winery in those days.
First
we were standing on the sorting line, with a lot of people that we got to know. So she figures prominently in our transition. In our transition, right?
We aren't using the R word.
We do not use the big R, capital R word. We say refocused and refinanced. Just because we moved on from our scientific careers to another career, we don't. In fact, we're spending more time working harder than we ever did before, but we absolutely love it. And so when Jeanne will tell you that if I can't get out in the vineyard or I can't get on the tractor or something like that, I start to get antsy because I want to get out there. I want to do stuff out there, and there's always something to do too. So
Well, and one of the key things I think about this career is it's physically challenging and mentally challenging, and that's
critical.
as you're aging, that's vital. So this is it's worked well.
So that's why wine, and that's how we got here, and that's how we made the transition from, and I don't mean this literally, from science that is doing scientific research to the science of the laboratory, of this gigantic laboratory now, of this vineyard. And our journey has taken us through the education at Chemeketa, introduced us to a lot of interesting and new people. Many of the folks that you've interviewed, and many of the people who are now prominent folks in the wine industry, came from somewhere else. There are very, very few people who are actually here. There were natives, and of course, very few who are really. I mean, there are some folks who were farmers in other areas and began and got into the wine industry, but most of us came from outside the area. We find some of those people with their varied backgrounds to be fascinating. Not to suggest that we don't find the people who we got to know in the Chemeketa business programs who were from the grass seed industry, and there were poultry raisers and cattle and cherry people.
Oh yes,
and all of these
hazelnut.
Hazelnuts, yes, they were so interesting to see how they were struggling with their section, their ag sector, compared to, and how, comparing notes with how we were struggling and we're getting to learn what we're doing and so forth. So that community that we got into was really helped us along the way. We learned a lot from it. The other key thing about the wine industry here, and we'll talk later on about how it's changing, but the original time when we were getting here, a critical feature of the wine industry was how collaborative, how willing people were to share equipment, information, knowledge, pointers, everything. You name it. And so that really resonated very strongly with us, and we try to keep that going. Again, we'll come back to that because I think that is changing. I think the industry is evolving, but that was also a key part of our, shall we say, our success in meeting the challenges of learning how to do this, learning how to grow grapes and how to sell grapes and how to build a brand. Actually, I think that's a critical thing for us. The Crawford Beck brand is now well enough recognized that our clients put our names on the labels. We have right at this moment 4 single vineyards, and over the history we probably had a dozen or more different single vineyards made from this single vineyard wines made from this vineyard. And that's part of our goal for this place, is to build a brand for it, and one that people will recognize.
So I'm going to back up for just a moment here
Sure.
and talk about before wine. Just sort of curious, your scientific work, what were you doing in the laboratory before you moved into this laboratory?
Well, you should start.
I'll start.
NIH.
We were doing some fairly arcane stuff about how cells grow and how their membranes form. We did graduate work at Hopkins and then went off to Boston to do postdoctoral work, and then Jeanne joined the faculty at Hopkins, and I went into a research institute. And then I moved to the dark side. I became a scientific administrator and ran some research institutes, both both in New York and then in New Jersey. And Jeanne followed the classic academic route. She can tell you more about it, but she was on all of our work was primarily in the medical school, medical arena, medical research, biomedical research arena. And so I became an administrator and had a research institute that I ran. Jeanne's research was
at the end. At the end, I was lucky enough to be involved with the Human Genome Project, which was terribly exciting for me because I got to travel, and that's where.
One of those trips was to Portland, Oregon. Yeah.
Yes, but the Human Genome Project, and also we were involved because what was at the Institute, it was a cell bank, and so one of the many emphasis we had was on human genetic diseases. So I was involved in a breast cancer collaborative project that brought in the Canadians, the New Zealand, people from New Zealand, people from Australia, and of course the US. And that was exciting. That was breast and colon. And then of course the Human Genome Project that we had the samples. We kept the samples there. And I was lucky enough to go to China and to Japan because part of the work was we would collect the blood, which we then made a cell line from which we could
study in the laboratory.
Get the DNA. And once the people had provided the samples, I got to go back to those countries and talk about what we had done with it and how successful it had been. Wow. And it was so exciting for me, I think. And we developed a lot of collaborations with some places. You know, the wine wasn't so great.
Well, on the other hand,
New Zealand was great. Australia
whenever
was great.
Jeanne's Australian collaborators would come here, or Jeanne would go to Australia, there was always wine involved in the exchange. You know, and so there was a lot of we didn't ever get really too far from that particular component. Always sharing wine.
Yes, that was cool.
Yeah.
So.
And some of the things that Jeanne collected were primate samples.
Worked a lot with people in Africa.
That could be used for studying human diseases, and the diseases ranged everything from breast cancer. Jeanne's did a lot of work in breast cancer, but other genetic diseases. I think there was a Canadian family that was extended family, hundreds of people that had Alzheimer's.
Alzheimer's, early Alzheimer's.
Yeah, yes. And then in Italy, on Sardinia, there was an extended family where people lived. This in this case wasn't a disease, but where the people routinely lived to be 100 or more years old. And the question is, why does that happen? Why this? Why there? Why this family? What was it about their genes? All of these kind of things. Jeanne's collected these samples, and her laboratory made cell lines from them that can then be studied and used for.
Well, and one of the other, when you said about Italy, one of the other things was the institute where we were was the first to actually set up a stem cell bank. So here we are in New Jersey, we've got a stem cell bank, and lo and behold, you ended up setting up one in Milan.
In Milan, right?
Yeah. So it was,
so we had to go to
Milan.
We had to go to Milan. Tough work, but
Barolo.
Barolo, exactly. wine, always involved. Right?
Nebbiolo, right?
So that's a snapshot of the research that we were doing. It was
a good life.
It was definitely a fun career, without question. But we were constantly looking for funding for for the collecting, funding for the research, funding for the laboratories, and so and Jeanne is an expert writer. I mean, she could turn out a 500-page grant application in well, I wouldn't say in no time flat, but yeah.
No, but we.
But we swore we would never do that again. Guess what? We have.
Yes, several times, trying to get money here.
Yeah,
So.
I mean, one of the first things we did when we moved here was we probably can come back to this, Rich, later, but our philosophy is to work, to live and farm as sustainably as possible. And one of the first things we did was that we've got to get some solar panels in here, and and so we did. Jeanne wrote a grant application to the USDA, big fat grant application to get funding for our solar panels. And so outside are panels that actually produce more power than we consume. It can produce 100% of our power, but actually more than 100%. And so we turn back every year 10% or so of the power that we produce goes back into the grid and it's used for people who can't afford to pay their electric bills and stuff like that. So we surprised ourselves. We didn't get all that far away from writing grant applications. And,
No.
And there have been other things that we've done along the way, but.
Tell me about the scientific transition from laboratory work, that kind of work, to having your own outdoor laboratory, but in a very different way. Tell me about the similarities and differences between what you're doing before and what you're doing now.
Well, I'll start with a couple of things. So, as for our graduate programs, Jeanne was studying yeast. What a
Who would have thought? Who would have thought? 57 years later.
And I was studying a bread mold, and so these are microorganisms that we're not too far away from here. Then we got into into the human side later on, but as you're trying to understand what's going on in the vineyard, if you don't know about molds and fungi, you're lost. So that carried over very nicely. But science, regardless of what kind of science you're doing, whether it's biology or chemistry or physics, it's all about data. It's all about information. It's all about tracking and managing and understanding the systems you're working with. And that really is, and I will tell you that Jeanne can run circles around me with statistics and data management programs and all that kind of stuff. And so one of the things, that's why I said to you earlier, one of the things that we have is a phenomenal level of documentation about what goes on here. So we didn't really get very far away from that scientific component.
Well, and we've been very lucky to have collaborations with Walt Mahaffey at OSU, Patty Skinkus, Vaughn Walton. Anytime they've got a project,
and some scientists at Linfield too. We'll come back to that.
And George Fox. Yeah. So we have. This is keeping us active, which is really exciting, and we're learning in the process, and I think it's exciting to see. Well, we'll get to the wine board at some point, but it's exciting to see the research that's done in the wine industry, and how it can benefit us, and how it has benefited us.
There are lots of things to talk about, but maybe since we're on the research issue right now, maybe we should just talk about that for a second.
Absolutely.
Just because we believe that the world is not going to advance very far without a lot of research, whether it's health or nutrition or you name it. I mean, just about everything that goes on. I mean, all of your equipment comes out of research that came out of military and space research or something like that. The chemistry behind the batteries, the electronics and so forth. Everything comes out of a research background, and without any doubt, and by it's the same in the exact same way, what's going out in the vineyard. We won't learn how to grow grapes as the climate changes. We won't know how to grow. We won't know how to fight the diseases that afflict the grapes, either in general or as the climate changes, without research. And so the need for research is, deeply embedded in us. The rationale for pursuing and funding research is nothing more to us than self-preservation and self-improvement. So very early on in the second year, 2007, I got involved in the research committee for the Oregon Wine Board. And of course, all along, Jeanne is doing the research of managing the data and understanding what's going on in the vineyard. And so we really didn't leave the research community and the research enterprise, the research mind at all. As a result of my interest in viticulture research with the wine board. Well, at one point, whatever point I was, I ended up in 2009 as a member of the wine board, and I served on the wine board for 7 years. Before that, I chaired the research committee, and then afterwards, after I left the board, I remained vice chair of the research committee, just to encourage the program. And it's key to note that one of the things in my background, I said earlier, I went to the dark side. Well, I went into science administration, and one of the places that I did science administration was at the National Institutes of Health. And when I was there, I was responsible for administering a $300 million program in human genetic diseases. So I knew grantsmanship. I knew how to manage grants. I knew how to manage research programs as an enterprise. So bringing that with me to the wine board, I'm not beating my chest. I'm just telling you it just worked out well. Bringing that expertise to the wine board to strengthen and build and shall we say, formalize the research programs in a way that would maximize the amount of money that the industry could afford to put into research was a natural fit, and so I'm still involved in that to this day. Along the way, Jeanne and I have done a lot of research programs here, a lot of research projects here. One with fighting phylloxera. We had some own-rooted grapes that that had phylloxera, and we fought those with doing some research experiments on various insecticides. With Patty Skincus and Von Walton. We got involved in a spotted wing Drosophila project with Von Walton. We got involved with really important one for the wine industry, and that's the spore trapping project that Walt Mahaffey did at OSU, and we were one of his beta test sites for his equipment. And we have a laboratory in our barn where we were doing his assays for trapping powdery mildew spores. What else? I must have forgotten some others.
Well, now it's red blotch.
Oh, now we're involved in red blotch. We have our own red blotch assay running here.
Thanks to Bob Martin.
Thanks to Bob Martin at OSU/USDA. We have been on what they call stakeholder panels for some big federal projects, one with brown marmorated stink bug, and now currently one with the spotted lanternfly, which is not yet a big issue here, but could easily become a big issue here.
And the one in Block 1, spur and cane pruning.
Yes. we really wanted to spend some time studying the nature of pruning vines and what alternatives there were to pruning vines. There's one that's called spur pruning versus cane pruning, and that takes us into a mechanization rationale. Is one better than the other for mechanization as labor becomes more expensive and more difficult to find. So. There must be something else that I've forgotten, but one of the things that we've done is we'd like to maintain contact with students. We really, from our academic days, we didn't want to leave the student contact behind, and so being involved in some of the programs at Linfield has been extreme. Oh well, I should mention it. Speaking of Linfield, we've been really very much involved with the microbiome project that Jeremy Wise is doing at Linfield, and now is collaborating with a faculty member at the University of Oregon named Krista McGuire. One of the things that I always tell students in my previous days and here when I talk to them, talk to the Linfield students who come here, speaking of coming here, we don't have room for a classroom here, so what we do is we clean out the barn and set up the chairs and set up the screen and put up the projector, and we've got an instant classroom. But one of the things that I always tell the students is to ask questions. The most important question to ask is why. And so when Jeanne and I are doing stuff in the vineyard, the first thing we ask is, why does that work? Why? What are we doing? Why are we doing it? Is there a better way to do it? Why? Constantly say, why? And so that's a part of what we do on if not a daily basis, certainly a project kind of basis in the vineyard. What other research things that should I talk about? It's just a key part of the way we think about the vineyard. When we talk about sustainability, are there better ways to farm? Are there ways that respect the ecosystem? What is happening with what we're doing now, and are there either, and so sustainability is a three-pronged or a three-factor kind of thing. There's economic sustainability. I mean, if we can't afford it, if we run out of money, then all the other sustainability goes away. There is ecological sustainability, and if you're not respecting the ecosystem, you're damaging the earth, damaging the so you're not sustainable in that regard if you don't understand how to respect and protect the ecosystem, and if you and there's social sustainability. We don't want to not only poison the water, but we also want to make sure that the people who work here are respected and are protected as best we can. So there are three components, three major parts of sustainability, and they all enter into our decision-making processes. And I got at this by saying, what do we tell the students when we're talking about sustainability? Constantly question what's going on. Constantly ask why, so that you, so that all the things all the opportunities become explored and all of the problems become solved. I'm now being wishful. A lot of wishful thinking. There are an awful lot of problems that we haven't solved yet, but or won't solve anytime soon, perhaps. But the question is, what are you doing, and how are you doing it? And always ask questions. So. Now I'm wandering into some philosophical realms here that Jeanne's probably.
We should let him
me.
ask some questions.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah. Where else do you want to go?
I'm curious. Before we get back into that, I'm curious what your knowledge of Oregon wine was before coming here. Had you had Oregon wine? Did you have any kind of comprehension of what it was, and what you thought you were getting into, perhaps, versus what you actually were getting into when you came to Oregon?
Well, okay, Jeanne will probably want to add to this. I know she will. But we were aware of Oregon wine, but didn't know much about it. And so that week that we spent in the valley, exploring, drinking, buying wine. We took enormous amounts of wine, well, cases of wine back to the East Coast with us. We learned a lot very quickly, and one of the things that we learned, as Jeanne said early on in our discussion here today, was that we learned that there was a fascinating industry that was producing really, really, really high quality Pinot Noir. And I keep emphasizing Pinot Noir, not because I think that's the only grape that Oregon grows. I know it's not. And we didn't really understand the quality, the depth of the quality of the Chardonnay that's grown here. Pinot Gris, popped really pretty early on, just because that was such a large component in those days. And now it's decreasing a bit, and we didn't really know anything about Southern Oregon and some of the warm weather grapes that are grown down there, and we've learned about them since. But it was the quality of the Oregon wine that we learned in August that took us, in September to find a real estate agent to come out here and become part of it. It didn't take us long to see that was a natural progression for us to take our avocation into a vocational kind of thing, and if you pardon me for saying it, escaping from the pressures that that Jeanne and I both had been dealing with as money became tighter and tighter for the scientific enterprise. What is that?
That's good.
Okay. All right.
Excellent.
All right.
What about the actual act of growing grapes and running a vineyard? Is it about what you expected it would be? Is it more? Is it less? How is it different?
Well, Jeanne grew up in a small town in western Pennsylvania, so she wasn't maybe a farm girl, but I grew up way out in the country in Maryland, and so we had a farm, and I was selling a small farm, and so growing stuff in those days was sort of part of what I did. It didn't dawn on me that there was anything, that people didn't grow stuff, And when I mean, when I say that, my mother canned everything, and through the winter, we, whether it's canned tomatoes or beans or limousines or tomato sauce or applesauce or whatever it was, we ate what we grew, and so the concept of growing stuff was not so foreign to us, and then as Jeanne and I got married and spent the summers, in and out of my parents' garden, mini farm. I guess we got enough sense that growing was now. It's really critical. Lisa Neal's told us that growing grapes. Agriculture is a stylized thing, and growing grapes, you grow them a certain way because that's the way people have found that they grow. And Lisa Neal told us that we had to go to Chemeketa. I mean, she said it that way. We've got to go to Chemeketa. It wasn't voluntary. It wasn't, something that we would, we would say, oh, well, maybe we'll try that. No, you are going to Chemeketa. And that's how we, learned the depth of plant physiology and viticultural technology, farming, how to farm grapes and how to manage grapes, and what happens if you don't manage them, and what happens if you don't pay attention to the pests that are in the vineyard that will certainly take over your vineyard if you don't fight them. So all of that stuff. I guess we spent 3, maybe 4 years at Chemeketa.
Yeah. Well worth it.
Well worth it, absolutely. The people who come here and do it because they just want to have a vineyard in their backyard are doomed to be. Well, I don't want to say failures, but certainly, they'll have to hire somebody to do it for them. And we knew we'd have to hire somebody to do all the handwork, that we couldn't possibly do it all ourselves, and we weren't ever intending to do all of that kind of. We just knew we couldn't possibly with 15, with an acre maybe, but with 15 acres, no. And so for the first, less and less now, but for the first part of our time here, I did all the tractor work myself. Now there are so many other things on our agenda, on our plate, that we can't do it, and first and second, it's physically exhausting. So we have to hire now a management company to do a lot of that stuff for us. But
one of the first class I took at Chemeketa was a business class. You were taking the vineyard management class, and I took business, and I had to write a business plan. Here we are. We've been here less than a month. And I'm trying to write a business plan. Yeah. But that was extraordinary. That was what I needed to do. And I think I'm very excited to see that, the wine program at Linfield is focusing on the business as well, because that was vital for us to really understand, to be able to do all the enterprise analyses and so forth. So.
While you're there, let me come. I'm sorry, I'm going to derail your program here, but one of the things that got us so excited about the concept of establishing a wine education program at Linfield was not because we thought that Linfield should compete with Chemeketa. It couldn't and shouldn't. Not that Linfield should compete with Oregon State. It couldn't and shouldn't. Those are vocational programs. But Jeanne and I are both the products of liberal arts education, and during the course of our careers, we've had 3 or 4 different phases, 3 or 4 different careers, depending on how you count them, and that wouldn't be possible if we hadn't had a liberal arts background that enabled us to move from one place to the other. Even the students who are graduating from Linfield now probably don't really understand how lucky they will be as their liberal arts education takes them into new fields. And so the idea of having a wine education program that's layered over, that has built in that liberal arts education is something that's very exciting to us. Somebody may come out of the wine education program and think that they want to get into hospitality or winemaking or tasting room management or whatever, but they'll have the skills because of the background and the business background to be able to move into any other parts of the wine industry or beyond. They may become journalists and write about wine or food or wine and food pairing. I mean, you name it. There are so many opportunities that the breadth of the wine education program with the liberal arts education overlay will create, and that is really exciting and a departure from the more vocationally oriented kind of programs that people think about. When you say, "Oh, I'm going to study wine," I say, "Oh, you're going to make wine or you're going to grow grapes?" No. You're going to do whatever you want to do, but you have a background that will take you in one of those, in some pathway, if you want to stay in the wine industry, and if not, you still have the breadth of your liberal arts education to take you somewhere else. And that's my commercial for Linfield.
We couldn't have paid for a better one than that. Tell me about, as long as we're on the topic, tell me about Linfield as they were forming that program and input you had in that and kind of your thoughts in guiding what Linfield Wine Education Program would look like.
Well, Jeanne and I both certainly cheered Tom Helly on as he talked about that. And we encouraged him very strongly, and we saw the potential that I just described to you, and I probably gave him the exact same lecture, not that he needed it. I'm sure he saw it well before I did, but and we knew actually one of the scientists that we met early on in our time here in Oregon was Greg Jones, and so when the idea of recruiting Greg to come to Oregon and come to the Willamette Valley and put this this wine education program into a practical, functional framework at Linfield. We again cheered Tom on. Yes, absolutely. And the day before Greg started working at Linfield, before he actually, became a faculty member, out on that porch back there, we had a big dinner party for him, and so to welcome him to the Valley. So we were cheering Linfield on the entire time. A corollary of that was during this time when the concept of building the wine education program was going on. There was also a lot of discussion going on at Linfield about building a new science building, and so because we had already established some connections with a bunch of the science faculty, and we're working. The students were coming here. Linfield students every year come here to do experiments in the vineyard. Several of the faculty members bring their science classes here. They come to talk about microbiology in the vineyard and other sorts of things, and so we got to know the science programs at Linfield, and we really were cheering on Linfield again in terms of building a new science program, and so we were involved in the planning committee. I'm not sure what more to say about that, but it was part of our. One of the things we were doing was encouraging building the science programs. One of the things that is really important to me, having grown up in the academic world, where there was a chemistry department and a biology department and a physics department and this department and that department, was that I didn't like departments. I didn't like all those silos, all those discrete things, and I really like the idea of blending the disciplines, figuring out how to make the chemists talk to the biologist, and the biologists talk to the physicist, and the physicists talk to the electrical engineering people, or whatever it might be, ways to break down the silos. And so Jeanne's and my message to the planning folks for the Linfield Science Building is find ways to mix the departments. You can have a department of physics, and you can have a department of chemistry, but put the scientists, the faculty members, mix them in such a way that the students can't escape talking. If you're a biology student, you can't escape talking to somebody who's in the chemistry department, because they're all together, they're blended, the silos are kind of melded together, so to speak. That's maybe neither here nor there as far as we're concerned here, but that was one of the things that we learned. Jeanne was the chair of her board of trustees at her college, and there I was on a building committee to build a science building there. And Jeanne did build. Jeanne, when I say she built it, it was while she was chair of the board.
It occurred during my time on the board. So
we had some experience in building the science buildings. And actually, when in the research institute that I had, we built. I inherited part of the research institute, but then we built a whole new science building, a whole new laboratory building to expand the institute. So it was kind of a thing that we got to know and see happening at a very, very intimate level on both in our career and Jeanne's experience at her college, and then we wanted to see that next level occur here at Linfield too.
And Jeanne, you're on the advisory board for Chemeketa's wine program as well.
Yes.
Tell me about that and about your experiences there and what you've seen. Obviously, we do a lot of these interviews. We speak to a lot of people who've gone through Chemeketa's program and are very happy with this. Tell me what Chemeketa's doing and sort of what you're hoping it will look like in the future.
Well, they have spent some time searching for faculty recently, and I think at this moment they're getting very close to hiring someone to teach the viticulture. They have a young, energetic person who's doing the winemaking now. So I think it's going in the right direction. It's the advisory group, huge breadth of expertise in that group. I mean, they're lucky enough to have a gentleman who does sparkling, Andrew
Davis.
Andrew Davis is a member of that group, and then you have some older people.
Is it all industry?
Yes, I think so. Well, yes, I think so. And there are some people from the other campus. But it's a very. I mean, I learn a lot in those meetings, and I really appreciate being involved because they're looking at right at this moment they're looking at a viticulture track, which is kind of expansive, but you have to do that now because we're thinking about things like the microbiome that we didn't think about in 2006.
No.
That's only been all the research at Davis in 2012 and so forth that's led us to think about these other things. So I'm very impressed with the program, where it's going. And I like having the opportunity to give back because they gave me so much. I mean, so many of our friends and just so much knowledge, I would say. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And in fact, that touches on another major topic. I mean, so Jeanne's involved with the Chemeketa, and we're involved with a bunch of other things. Again, along the lines of wanting to give back, wanting to contribute back to our industry. I mentioned I was on the board for the wine board and the Oregon Wine Board and the Oregon Wine Growers Association. Jeanne and I have been very active in the Olamide Hills AVA group. And we still are. We were very active from the very beginning. It was formed in 2006. The AVA was established in 2006, and so we got here
that's right. Yes.
right at the time that all this was, this was happening, and so we helped form the AVA organization. There grew out of our time at Chemeketa. Well, it didn't grow out of our time. There was for the people who were at Chemeketa, there was a thing called the Willamette Valley Wine Growers Group. You've talked to it. You've spoken about Chemeketa there, about the archive there, and we'll need to get you back again in this coming year to keep people thinking about protecting their history. And so now I'm the program chair for that, and I've been running that for
2 years, maybe.
3 years, 2 years. I don't know, forgotten already. 3 years. 3 years. I still review grants for the wine board. I review grants for the American Viticulture Foundation. I'm on the board for the Agricultural Research Foundation (ARF) at OSU, that funds grants from a fund that OSU has established. And I actually have grants sitting for me on my computer right at this moment, waiting for me to review those. I'm on the Oregon Wine Advisory Board for Greg Jones for that program. Jeanne and I have had a group called the Northwest Bio, a bunch of faculty members to teach biology at colleges throughout the Northwest, and so we bring those people here.
Thanks to Chad, that was Chad
Chad
Tilburg.
was part of that. Yeah, Chad Tilburg. Let's see. So whenever there's some opportunity to help the industry advance, whether it's research or just communicate, we've tried very hard to give back to what we felt we were given when we came here. People were very generous with us.
Let's talk about the wine board specifically for a second, and your work on the research group there. Obviously, the Oregon Wine Board's it's pushing a lot of things for the wine industry right now. And tell me about your time on it. What were the biggest concerns? What were the biggest things people wanted? What were the biggest things you felt like were accomplished by the board?
Oh, that's a very interesting thing. So the wine board's function, now the wine board per se, now we're not going to talk about the lobbying part, the Wine Growers Association, which is a whole other conversation. But the wine board's function is really primarily research, and now there's about $500,000 that goes into research. When I started, it was about $300,000, so we've ramped it up a little bit. Still need a lot more to be sure. Another function of the wine board is marketing grapes, marketing wine, and the wine board major concerns were how to build programs, and what the shape of those marketing programs should be. Should they be supporting direct-to-consumer marketing, or should they be supporting marketing in offshore marketing, Japan and China and other places, or should they be helping winemakers find distribution systems throughout the country. And so I think the debate is still out about the most productive way to build the marketing programs. But the wine board is struggling with that. And the wine board members change. I actually was on 7 years, and in fact, I was probably the only person who ever served 7 years on the wine board. Most people serve 6, but the point is that there's a turnover, and so every time there's a new powerful voice coming on the wine board, directions can change and maybe reflect some of the new directions in the industry, but also reflect the interest of the board members. So that happens in all of the components. Another one is another function of the wine board is education, and every year there's a big educational symposium to bring the latest information in from research and marketing to members of the industry. The biggest concerns have varied from the time when I was on the board. The single largest concern had to do with land use issues and things like that. But we also have wrestled when I was on the board with, again, when I made a point of saying, the voices who are on the board, kind of can set the agenda. One of the things when I was on the board was we spent a lot of time talking about the value and the need for research. And so, guess who was the big mouth, going at the time? It was pretty much me. So, the board now is struggling with a number of other issues. Still, the issue of marketing is going around and around, and I'm hoping at some point that I know that there have been connections from time to time between the business program at Linfield and the marketing programs. I'd love to see that be strengthened. I'm not sure. I've lost touch with a lot of what's going on the board with regard to how they're structuring and where they might go in terms of the marketing programs. But I do know that the marketing program on the board has taken shall we say, a lesson from the vitinology side, research side, and now the board is funding marketing research programs, including data gathering and that kind of thing. So that's been a point of evolution that I'm very happy to see take place within the board. Being off the board means that you lose your connections, you lose your currency very quickly, and so staying involved in the research side, I definitely want to keep that going. I've not been a forceful voice in terms of marketing or anything like that since I left the board. I left the board in 2016.
Okay.
So my currency now is really in the vitrinology research side of things. My discussion with Greg, well, this you might not want to. In my discussion with Greg as he was getting his stuff, getting his programs kind of thought through, was that Linfield needed to have a vineyard on its campus. And so Greg and I talked about it, planned it out. And I mobilized a bunch of trellis materials and some plant material, and Greg got some plant material and got some other stuff donated, and
Voila.
And we got all of the class, Greg's class there, and I filled my truck full of wire and tools and whatever, and shovels, and we pounded posts in, and we put wires up, and we planted grapes, and I think it took us about 3 hours. And 3 hours we had that vineyard all in place, and that's really exciting because to see that actually in place on the vineyard, on a vineyard on the campus, and it's right there for all to see, and it's right in the, if not quite exactly in the middle of the vineyard, in the middle of the campus. It's you can't avoid walking past it if you're going to the library or wherever you're going, so.
I had students who worked for me who were also in that class, and I see what everybody's talking about. It wasn't that hard planting a vineyard.
Yeah?
Well, 16 plants.
Yeah, well, but
that's right.
Okay, it's just a matter of scale. It's, there's nothing that we did there that was not the exact same thing we would do out here. And seeing the students get involved and really do it themselves. I mean, I was not doing it for them, believe me. And Greg and I were there, and we were just saying, okay, here's what you do. Now here, cut this wire, do this, do that, and they were doing it. They did it themselves, and I really was very, very pleased to see that kind of. I mean, they were working. I mean, they were not just standing around watching. They were actually pounding posts and digging holes and the whole thing. And so it was a real student effort in every way. So now I think sometime Greg and I and the class will go out there. I think I was talking to him, actually I saw him last night, and we have to go out and prune the vines and plant the one vine that died, that didn't make it through the summer, and get the vineyard in shape for the coming year.
Absolutely.
It's still too young to produce any grapes, but and it will never produce enough to make wine, to be sure, but certainly enough to go out and taste,
Sure.
taste the grapes and see what's going on. And
see the various stages of the year. So, Jeanne, I want to back up for a second to, you mentioned you're barely in Oregon and you're at Chemeketa taking business classes and creating a business plan. So I'm curious, with the initial decision not to do a winery, not to make wine, just to grow grapes, I'm curious about that initial business plan and how close it was to what you actually ended up doing and building this brand and finding great buyers and all that. I'm just sort of curious, how close to the mark was it?
Well, and this was a great class. I projected that we would lose $30,000 the first year. And that was pretty close. My classmates would each stand up and say, I'm going to make hundreds of thousands of dollars each year. And it's like, okay. But it was a good experience because we knew, it was going to take a while to get this place up and running. And sure enough, we lost at least $30,000 that first year. But
the thing that Jeanne put in her business plan, as a matter of right, a matter of law, we have the right to build a winery here because we have enough grapes, and there are some standards in the law, and we even have a place where we could put a winery here if we wanted to do that. And if somebody bought this property at some point in the future and wanted to do that,
because we have enough grapes,
they could do that.
Yeah.
But Jeanne's business plan, I shouldn't speak for you, but Jeanne analyzed what it would cost to start up a winery. We know that it costs to put an acre of grapes in on bare ground. It costs about at least $25,000, and maybe a little more now because of people are using better materials and so forth. Establishing a winery and putting a building in place and getting all the equipment was well beyond number one, to be sure, well beyond our means, but also well beyond any kind of amortization that we could envision to actually make that be a debt-free operation. Mm-hmm. So it would entail a large amount of debt, and thus take a very long trajectory for amortizing that. So,
well, and so there was equipment here. But they started with the vineyard. Okay, yeah. It was a very small sprayer, and when you start thinking about how long it took the guy he was going back to the barn continuously, and so we bought a larger sprayer. Well, guess what? The small tractor couldn't manage the larger sprayer, so suddenly we're buying another tractor. I mean, it was just one thing after another, and
we learned by doing.
Yes. But now we have a nice tractor and a nice big sprayer, so he only goes back to the barn 3 times during the day. So, yeah.
You mentioned the importance of building the brand and your pride in having a single vineyard, Crawford Beck designate. Mm-hmm. Tell me about that. Tell me about relationships with buyers and how you were able to kind of find people who were the kind of buyers you were looking for and show them that you had the grapes they were looking for.
That's yours.
Okay. Well, during the course of our scientific career, we learned, I said that we spent a huge amount of time, writing grant applications. When I say we, now I'm talking about the royal we. Jeanne spent a huge amount of time writing grant applications because she was so good at it. I mean, she really was good at it. At one point, she had written grant applications that were producing $8 million a year. So she was a star in that regard. But as a result of that kind of experience, we knew that what you had to do was you had to sell yourself. It was always about selling yourself. It was always about making individual connections, whether it was between Jeanne as a principal investigator and the granting agency, building that bridge. And so we knew that kind of thing was essential for any kind of success that we wanted to have here. And so we also knew when we came into this vineyard, bought this vineyard, there was one client who had been buying all of the grapes from this vineyard for that first 10 years until we bought it. It was planted in '96, and we took it over in 2006. So we knew, Jeanne, again, part of Jeanne's business plan analysis, that we really didn't want to be entirely dependent on one buyer. Mm-hmm. And so we knew we needed to diversify. And so we immediately took that skill or experience of selling yourself and started talking with people about, the great attributes of this property and the great attributes of the vineyard. It's all about telling a story. It's all about telling, when I talk to people when they come here, especially if we were courting a new client, I talk about the flow of the lava and the rocks and why they're here and not over there. And it's all about a story, whether it's a geological story or a micro terroir kind of story or whatever it is. And so we diversified from one client to now we have 5. And I think that's about the right mix for this vineyard. It buffers us so that if one year one client, and this has happened, I will not mention any names, but if one client can't afford to pay us right on time, we're not at risk. Our whole operation isn't at risk. Mm-hmm. And so it happens, especially when the wine market is down a bit. Winemakers are dependent on the payments from their distributors, and if the distributor isn't selling the wine and can't pay the winemaker, and the winemaker can't pay us, and so that's a fact of life in the industry. Fortunately, it doesn't happen very often. But there are a group of coterie of lawyers who specialize in recovering payments from people who don't pay. And because of the nature of the ag laws in Oregon, producers of crops have an inherently favored position in terms of money being owed. We get paid before the bank gets paid. We get paid before, as a crop producer, we get paid before anyone else, and so we have a leveraged, shall we say, a nicely leveraged position in terms of getting paid. But we have on occasion had to go out and beat the bushes a little bit there. So that's only, I tell you that only by way of saying that we having a diversified client base, every one of whom we have very close relationship with. We talk to. We in some cases they're actually really good friends of ours, and that's always a danger. What happens if your friend can't pay you? We like our clients, genuinely like our clients. It's not an arm's length kind of.
And I think one of the things that's interesting about this property, so one clone that we have, 115, we actually have a number of blocks of that, and they're purchased by different buyers, and the wines are very different, even though they're grown here on the same property, same weather, and so forth. That, to me, is what's always exciting. The winemaker trumps things.
Right. Well, I always tell that, probably to the consternation of faculty, Linfield faculty, but I always tell the faculty that the Linfield students who come here is that we can talk about terroir, and I like to talk about terroir, and I like to talk about the components of terroir, but winemaker trumps terroir every time. I take the notion of this is all about the sense of place. It is, but it's also about the sense of the winemaker's take on the place too. So that's perhaps my own prejudice that I've learned in the 14 vintages that we've been here.
So let's talk about terroir, and you mentioned micro terroir on your site. So tell me, as you describe, if say I'm a new purchaser of your grapes, how would you describe the terroir of Crawford Beck to me?
This terroir is based on volcanic soil. It's based on the lava flows that came to this area from about 15 million years ago. That began from the supervolcano over in Nevada, I think, and the lava started flowing up through Idaho and Montana, and then as those pushes and shoves and the huge amounts of volcanic activity began to disrupt the what was then emerging as the Cascade mountain range. They started releasing their own lava flows, and they got further and further. Some of the lava from that supervolcano that happened, 15, 20 million years ago, actually did make it all the way to what became the coast, because the plate tectonics were pushing these hills up out of the ground. And so before the lava flows happened 15 to 20 million years ago, this was all bottom of the ocean that had just been pushed up out of the ground. Things probably started to grow, but it looked otherwise pretty much like white sandy beaches that were pushed up out of the ocean. And now if one imagines those white ocean bottom ground, now newly emerged from the ocean, now being covered by the lava that's flowing from out there. I keep pointing that way because they were, from Mount St. Helens and Mount all the volcanoes up through that range now are spewing lava, and at different times. So they're coming in different from different directions, different amounts, different composition. As they're coming and flowing over, hitting these hills, these Eolamity hills, which had been pushed up during the pushing and shoving of the tectonic plates, the lava hits the hills, gets to the top of this hill, and doesn't quite make it all the way over. And again, different flows at different times, but. You can see a clear demarcation out there where the lava flow got to the top of this hill, maybe over just a little bit, but on the other side of the hill over there, didn't make it there. And so out there, that ancient marine sediment, which is what it's called, the ancient marine sediment, is still right at the surface. It's right there, just as it is over on the Willackenzie soils on the other side of the valley, where the lavas didn't get very, very deep, or didn't get there at all. And so we have on this side of the vineyard, we have some places where the volcanic soil is very, very deep, deeper than I can dig with any equipment that I've got here. Not likely anywhere near as deep as the volcanic soil is in areas like Dundee and up in Chehalem Hills and so forth, where it's very, very deep there, where you can't find the bottom even with big pile drivers and so forth. But here we have nice volcanic soil over there, nice volcanic soil over here, and now from this side over you have shallow and decreasingly, increasingly shallow volcanic soil laying over top of the marine sediment, including, by the time you get to the far side of this property, the marine sediment is right at the surface. And I can put my shovel in the ground, and I don't need a big backhoe to find the marine sediment. It's right over there. And so what you get then is soils with different water holding capacity, different nutrients, different microbiomes probably, and we're waiting for Jeremy to tell us more about that. And so you get throughout this vineyard also, because of the nature of the swale that comes right up through the central part of this property, and the swale points right straight across the valley at the Van Duzer Pass. And so every afternoon at 3:30 or 4 o'clock, like clockwork in the summer, the breezes start to blow and come right up through here and cool off the vineyard. And that's all part of the micro terroir that this property has. So in the center part, you have the breezes, you have the different depths of soil, you have the different aspects. Most of the property faces southwest, but some of it faces more west. Some of it is flat, like out in front, for example. And so all of these little quirks, whether it's difference in aspect, difference in soil, difference in water holding capacity, difference in exposure to the cooling afternoon Van Duzer breezes, create pockets of difference that each of these blocks of grapes express in the fruit that's produced. And that really, winemakers love that kind of variation. And because this is a site that's cooled by the Van Duzer breezes, for a winemaker who wants to buffer himself or herself from a warm year or a cool year, then buying grapes from a vineyard like this is a really good part, an important part of a winemaker's portfolio. So in a cool year, you want to have grapes coming from a nice warm spot like Dundee. But in a hot year, You might want to have grapes coming from a vineyard that's cooled because we're right exposed to the Van Duzer corridor, Van Duzer breezes that don't quite make it up to Dundee. You know, the breezes get through, but by the time they get up there, they're hot. When they come here, they're coming right straight across the valley. I mean, you know, in a few hours, you know, as the day goes on and the onshore flow and the offshore flow becomes an onshore flow, those breezes are really critical to the characteristic of the grapes and thus the wine that's made from this property. Did I tell the story? Is that
Yes.
all? Or, yeah, okay. No, I mean, Jeanne
No, because
keeps...
the nights are, you know, in September, our nights are in the 40s. And I think that's the reason we have acids. Oh, I even
Jeanne
plot.
talks about it in terms of acids and that kind of thing. So
Yeah, I look at the pH and then look at the 30 days before harvest, what's been the average temperature. And I love plotting stuff like that.
yeah.
You mentioned a project with George Fox that you were excited about that you've been thinking about earlier.
We talked briefly about the various collaborations, scientific collaborations, and there's
Right.
one that Jeanne and I have been, both of us, really involved in. We're on this little committee at George Fox and the George Fox engineering students. And when I
And
say
the computer
engineering,
science,
Pardon me?
the engineering and the computer science.
so in the among the disciplines at George Fox, there's the mechanical engineers, there's the computer science guys, there's some electrical engineers. I'm missing something. There's a different group all getting together to solve a problem that is a really serious one for us. Now, when I say a serious problem, I mean it's not something like a disease, but one of the things we have to know, that we have to tell we have to be able to tell our clients about, and with some accuracy, is how much fruit is actually, what's the crop load, what's hanging out there. They need to know because they want to know, first of all, is there too much in terms of what they want to have ripen on the vines? But also they want to know how much is going to come into their winery. Can they accommodate it? Is it enough or is it not enough? And so they need to know what's hanging out there. And so Jeanne and I go out and we measure the crop load by, and this is the way everybody does it. Some people do it more by eyeballing it, but we actually go out and count and weigh and do calculations about what's hanging out there. Wouldn't it be nice if there were some way to mechanize that and make it much more inherently accurate? And so what the what the George Fox engineering students are doing, they're not all guys. In fact, most of the best of them are women, I should tell you. What they're doing is trying to build a robot that will go up and down the rows, that will image the grapes that are hanging on those vines, and do some kind of when Jeanne and I are doing it, we sort of say, okay, we sample here and here and here and here, and then multiply by a very large number, and so you have a very large error rate. With the robot, it can go up and down the row, measure a lot of grapes in a lot of rows, if not every grape or every cluster of grapes in every row, because if it's a robot, you just turn it on and let it go, you know. And so they've been doing this now for a couple of years. We've been on this little advisory committee, and this year, for the first time, they actually have been trying to do a proof of concept kind of thing. They had a student come out the entire time, the entire summer, once a week, and take pictures of every single vine in one of the blocks of grapes. And we worked with our client who buys those grapes. I'll tell you, this is Winderley, buys the grapes. Our client, our manager, is Sterling Fox, who is a friend of the dean of the engineering school, and so all of these people got together to design and figure out how we're going to make this project happen, and then how we're going to take it through, not only from the summer phase, but all the way up through harvest. And so that involved, cooperation with the vineyard manager, with our client, and Jeanne and I out there, helping, doing whatever we can throughout this whole process, and it's wonderful. Will they get to a point where they've got a viable robot to do this? Well, I don't know, but I sure hope so.
Oh, definitely.
But if not,
Sooner rather than later.
The worst thing that has happened, that will have happened, is that we help students, formulate a project and bring that project through tuition. So we're winners because we like the student part of it. The students are winners because they get access to a vineyard that wants to cooperate. That they have, a commercial production vineyard that they have they can play in, basically. And of course the industry it wins if they produce a robot that actually can do what we all want it to do. Did I leave any of that out?
No.
Yeah. So now Jeanne and I are anxiously awaiting the first.
In 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks,
we get to hear their results.
Their first assessment of the work for this year.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So cool.
I'm not expecting to walk in and see a robot that has, but we're expecting to see, it's, every year there's a class of students that take this on as a project, and they keep moving it up and up.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we've talked about you guys. Let's talk about the industry a little bit more in general now. Obviously, you said 14 harvests.
14 harvests for us, yes.
So tell me,
that's how we don't say years. We talk about vintages.
Exactly.
Actually, we say 14 vintages.
14 vintages, exactly.
Yeah.
So tell me about the changes you've seen in Oregon and what Oregon wine looks like today at the end of 2019.
Oh.
Well, when we first came here, I emphasized this very strongly earlier in our conversation this afternoon. I emphasized how cooperative and collaborative the industry was for us, how important that connectivity. I could go up, Jeanne and I would go up to some of the grand old men, the grand old progenitors of the industry, and say, can you help us with this? I need to talk to you about that. What happens if we do the following, or what happens if we don't? How do we fight this disease, and so forth? And they'd tell us everything, whatever that we wanted to know. And I have no reason to think that wouldn't happen now if I went up to somebody like a David Adelsheim or a Harry Peterson Nedry and ask some various questions. But one of the things that we've seen, and it may not necessarily be all bad, but one of the things that we've seen, and that happened very, very decidedly in the time that we've been here, is just as we came as a mom and pop operation, now corporations are coming in to buy land that has proven its value, has proven its ability to produce very high value grapes. We've seen folks from increasingly from California to the south, and Washington to the north, and France to the far east, or and folks from all over the area coming to buy grapes and bring in a more corporate, larger operation. It used to be, and Jeanne can address this because she's the data person here, but it used to be when we first came here that a 15-acre vineyard, like the one we bought, was the median size vineyard in Oregon. That is, half of them were larger and half of them were smaller. Now we think that size has definitely changed, and the reason that median-sized vineyard is now much larger than this is probably over 20 or maybe more acres than that. It's 30. It's hard to get those 30.
Well, if you look at the number of from the survey in 2018, if you look at the number of vineyards and the number of acres, planted acres, it's about 30 acres per vineyard.
Yeah. Okay.
Whereas before.
Okay. It's hard to get these kind of data really accurately, and so Jeanne is probably has the best data, the best interpretation of the data that anybody.
Well, but you have to realize not everybody fills out those surveys.
Right. It's self-reporting, and not everyone will take the time to fill out surveys. The point of saying all this is that the nature of farming grapes is moving to larger and larger operations.
But I think
fewer and fewer of the mom and pop kind of. Jeanne and I were, we're mom and pop. I mean, and we're classic.
Or grandma and
examples
grandpa.
Grandma and grandpa, grandmom and grandpop, or something like that. But you get the idea. They're more and more are owned by some out of, maybe even as far away as Australia, or I mean, there are corporate interests that determine what happens in the vineyard, what can get spent, whether you make is the goal to make a $20 bottle of wine, or in our case, most of the wine that comes from this vineyard goes into $50 and $60 bottles of wine. That shift to a corporate backdrop is definitely palpable, if not, I'm not going to suggest negatively so, because some of the corporate people we know and we like. It's just that there is, the control is not local anymore. It's from somewhere else. It's from somebody else who's got the ownership interest.
But also, you and I talked about this, the emphasis now on Chardonnay.
Mm-hmm.
We're now having Chardonnay symposia.
Yeah.
And then sparkling. This is new.
Two very, very key things.
Yeah.
And what they do, what those two things. Let me just back up.
Mm-hmm.
One of the so Oregon contributes about 1% of the amount of wine produced, give or take, in this country. 1%, not very much, and we're a distant third behind Washington and California. And maybe we're not even third. We might even, depending on what the numbers are, we might even be fourth behind New York. So the point is, we have limitations here, and the limitation isn't really land yet. Like places like California, the limitation is land. I mean, it's built up, it's planted out, pretty much. But what the limitation might actually be is that even if we could grow more grapes, and we are growing more grapes, and we're actually producing more grapes in this vineyard than we did when we first bought it, because people are willing to crop it a little bit more heavily. There isn't enough winery space. There aren't enough places to make wine. And this comes to whether it's Pinot or Chardonnay, but especially when Jeanne's point about sparkling wine is right on. The sparkling wine that's being made in Oregon right now is actually knockout gorgeous. It is really wonderful. And from this vineyard, there have been two sparkling wines, one made by Winderley and one made by Adelsheim. And both of them are just lovely wines. But the capacity for the industry to make sparkling wine is actually, we were at the capacity. The guy who's on the Chemeketa board with Jeanne, Andy Davis, he can take no more clients. There is no more capacity for making sparkling wine right now, and so people are actually making knockoff sparkling wines, meaning just gassing bottles of Chardonnay and putting a crown cork on it. It's not exactly sparkling wine, but that's that's sort of the fallback for not being able to find enough capacity to make Méthode Champenoise wine. So we're seeing that limitation. We're seeing the industry kind of hit a ceiling that it hasn't quite figured out how to burst through yet. I hope the answer is not finding out-of-state investors to build more wineries, but maybe that's what we need. Maybe that's the way to get above our 1%.
But the industry has clearly expanded into those,
without question.
Focusing more on Chardonnay
Sure.
and sparkling,
Sure.
and less on Gris, Pinot Gris.
I mean, you can see that the absolute gorgeous wineries that have been built, like Domaine Roy and Resonance and so forth. Those are and Domaine Serene. I mean, those are wineries that are built with huge amounts of money that have come from outside the area. They didn't come from money that came organically from the industry, where gee, I've got an extra money this year, I'm going to put that into a no, not. It comes from money who come in, from people with money who come in from the outside, who can put $5 or $10 million into building a winery. building a fancy tasting room, building an enterprise, and that's the change that I see. You know, I'm going to say at the outset, I'm not saying that it's bad, but it's happening, and it's different.
So what happens next? What do you see for the next 10 years of Oregon wine?
I think that what I just said that's happening is going to continue to happen, and everyone who comes here knows that the quality of the fruit, the quality of the terroir that's here certainly in the Willamette Valley in southern Oregon, and as we know more about what's going on in eastern Oregon and maybe even far eastern Oregon, Snake River and all that kind of that area, as those places become more and more exposed for their quality attributes, there'll be more and more people who will come and make the investment. Sorry, go ahead.
So this is a little off track, but the latest Wine Spectator, the 100 wines for this year, I think there were 5 from Oregon. I thought that was fantastic.
That's recognition that people can't miss.
Given that we're only 1% or whatever.
Well, the other thing that's also going to drive people to Oregon, and I'm now not a doom and gloom person, but as climate change, which is in fact very real, as that it continues to, I just want to make that clear on the record that I believe that climate change is happening. As that changes the nature of the grapes that can be grown in California, or lots of other places, Burgundy, Germany, Champagne Champagne. They're now talking about growing warm weather grapes in Champagne, and England is now growing cool weather grapes that used to be grown in Champagne. Now England is becoming a home for sparkling wine. As that happens, people will discover that there are still places in Oregon where the temperature is moderated like it used to be in California, in the Russian River Valley, and all by the coast, the northern California coast ranges. That they're to find that kind of environment, they're going to have to come to Oregon, and I think that will be a good thing for the growth of the industry, if that's if the growth of the industry is a good thing. I just I like the smallness. I like the similarity. Jeanne, one of the things when we've learned as we have followed Pinot Noir, we've learned a lot about Burgundy, and Burgundy is really a small operation there. It's a mom and pop sort of operation, not like the Loire Valley or California, where they're inherently large operations, and so if we want to move away from the mom and pop operations, then maybe that's going to happen. So I don't know.
But the quality is clearly there.
Quality is clearly here.
Yes, yes. I mean, it's yes, the quality is there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What have we left out?
What about for you two? What's next for the two of you? What do you want? What are you hoping with this?
I hope to die in the tractor on the vineyard.
That's not the first time we've heard that during one of these interviews.
No, that's our goal.
It's a noble goal.
Well, we don't want to leave. Let's just say that.
Well,
we don't intend to leave.
So I will tell you. So you're sitting in the house and you can look out the windows. Every window in this house looks out on the vineyard.
And we didn't build it. The gentleman who planted the vineyard built this house.
And the house is entirely on one floor, so we don't have any issues of getting around up and down the stairs or anything like that. We're set. This is where we want to live. This is where we want to be.
Oh.
And if I couldn't get out in the vineyard, then I'd leave it at that. Mentally and physically challenging. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
One of the things that you and I had talked about, we did not cover though, is the oak restoration.
Oh, yes. A key in part, we talked about this being a giant laboratory for us.
Yes, back to the philosophy part.
Our philosophy is that we want the entire farm. It's a 50-acre farm, and we like to keep talking about 15, and we actually have 16 acres of grapes out there. But the entire farm is an integrated ecosystem, as far as I'm concerned, and we see it that way. And there are about on the farm, the 16 acres of grapes are kind of scattered around, but there's one section that's sort of up the hill, and the hill kind of gets steep, and that area is about 10 acres, and it's full of old oaks, and we've been working over the past, how long, 8 years?
Yeah, it's quite a long time.
A long time. Clearing out the invasive species, the non-native invasive species. I'm going to start with those, like Scotch broom and blackberry, and then the native invasive species, things that we just don't want growing there. What our goal is to create an upland oak habitat and restore it. And so people will say an upland oak habitat restoration. What does that mean? We want to restore it to what it might have looked like for the first native peoples who came through here 15,000 years ago. So right after the Ice Age, the glaciers have melted and people started coming down through here on their way down to South America or wherever they went. And they would have seen an area that had lots of oaks, some firs, but in those days this was still pretty dry, and most of the firs were over along the coast. Now we've left some firs in this oak restoration, but and other native species, things like snowberry and come on, what's the ocean spray? Ocean spray, and some of these native species that would have been here 15,000 years ago. And one of the things that would have been here was milkweed. Where you know about the milkweed and the monarch butterflies that migrate huge distances, thousands of miles down to Mexico. Well, the milkweed that those butterflies live on, breed on, and feed on isn't around anymore. And so in this oak restoration, we now have a plot of milkweed that we've been planting and nurturing and trying to get to grow. And again, back to the data. We measure it. We measure. We go out and follow the health of those milkweed plants. Jeanne's got massive spreadsheets with all the data for what's going on with that. So it's a part of our philosophy. It's a part of the way we manage, whether it's grapes or milkweed or the oak restoration.
Well, and the USDA and Fish and Wildlife have been wonderful to us. They helped us restore, and then they came in with seeds.
Jeanne wrote some grants.
Yeah, Fish and Wildlife they've given us a lot of native seeds, and they come and check to see are they growing, and that's fun because you get to see, oh yeah, that one's made it, that one didn't, and then he brings more, and it's fantastic. It's been great working with Fish and Wildlife and USDA.
Yeah, so that's a kind of a
special project.
A special project, yeah, and it's something that whenever we have people and we're standing outside on the back porch looking out, the first thing we point to is that oak restoration, because it's
the lupins.
It's something we do not because there's any revenue in it whatsoever. It's something we do because it's the right thing to do.
But there's beauty in the lupins. Yes, in the spring.
Yeah, sure. The one thing that we've always said from the first time we set foot in Oregon is that this is a land of 1,000 shades of green, and so agriculture, as I said earlier, is a stylized kind of thing, and it's a monoculture and it's uniform. But when you have something like that oak restoration, you have all these different shades of green, and the oaks are different from the firs, and the maples are different. I mean, everything is different. The cherries, you name it. It's we can look out there and we can see those 1,000 shades of green, right right here. You know, it's fun to watch it watch it grow, and because a lot of this property is facing west, as the sun sets, especially in the late summer, when the sun rays are coming here almost horizontal with the ground, you get a kind of light that sort of fills this little valley here, this little micro terroir here that we have. That's you can't capture it on the camera. I've tried. And there are and every rainstorm that comes through, every one. I was never used to this, but we can. Rainbows are now just there's a rainbow. Okay, there's a double rainbow. Oh, triple rainbow. But you can't capture those. I can't capture those on my camera. I just don't know how to do it. But the light here is absolutely gorgeous. It's all kinds of colors. So, there's a huge aesthetic thing here that's going on as well. What have I left out?
I have just one more question for you. The most important question of all. So, what is the secret to a successful marriage in the Oregon wine industry? How do you work together as a married couple?
Oh, well, we have very different skills.
Yeah, we do.
I do QuickBooks because I love numbers.
Or Excel.
And he does the tractor work, or did the tractor work.
Yeah, Jeanne's a tree and leaf person, and I'm a forest person.
Yes, that's perfect.
Jeanne wants data, and I'm comfortable with BS.
You've just ruined the whole interview.
We are as different as we could be.
But 53
except for one
years.
thing. We like wine.
Oh yes, right. Pinot.
Yeah.
Pinot is our grape.
Yeah. But I let Jeanne pick the wine, so we don't get into fights about what we're having. I say, yes, dear, whatever you want.
As long as it's Pinot.
As long as it's Pinot. Yeah.
I think there isn't really a secret. It's that we have goals that that we both have bought into.
Yeah.
And
we each have different skill sets.
Yeah.
You're right. Tree versus forest. Leaves. No, let's get to leaves versus forest.
Individual veins on the leaves.
Probably. Yes. Yes.
Well, congratulations on 53 years of this together.
Yeah.
This is truly incredible to hear what you have. So, is there anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover or that we should have covered?
No, I think we've spilled our beans. But if anything occurs to us, we will certainly let you know. And I definitely will, as we need to make room for more stuff. That's a fact of life, no matter what you do. We will be providing the archives with a lot of. The first stuff will be some of the, like I said, the things from
The wine board.
things from the wine board, but also there are boxes of stuff about what we've done here in the Old Amity Hills that shows. It's not about us so much as it is reflections about what other people were doing at the time and who was doing what when in this area. So, if somebody wants to mine that information, looking for who were the new people, or who were how many of the new winemakers were women as they came on, and we're seeing that. That's another trend I should have mentioned.
Oh, yes.
About the quality of the wine that's being made by women. The quality of the wine isn't going up, and it's part of it. A lot of it has to do with the fact that there are new people with new sensitivities, new sensibilities. I think is the right word coming along, and that's a lot of them are women who are getting into this industry. So that, there'll be a lot of that kind of information. And if somebody ever wants to do a history of the research that was done here, at least in the late 2000s and certainly into the teens, that's there. And if I can stay involved, you'll have even more.
Excellent. We'll look forward to that. Well, Thank you both so much.
Thank
for your
you.
time
Thank
today,
you.
Thank you.
for sharing with
Thank you,
us.
Shelby.
And we
The lady behind the camera there.
and we will let you both off the hook now.
Okay.